It was supposed to be the perfect Christmas. I had planned everything down to the smallest detail, decorating the house with festive lights, preparing a feast for my family, and picking out the perfect Christmas tree. The snow outside was falling softly, and the warmth from the fire crackled in the living room as I sat back, feeling content. Little did I know that this Christmas would turn into the most terrifying night of my life. It started like any other Christmas Eve. My family and I gathered around the tree, exchanging gifts and sharing stories, laughing as we sipped hot cocoa and enjoyed each other's company. The house was filled with the comforting scent of pine, cinnamon, and the faint aroma of the turkey roasting in the oven. Outside, the world seemed peaceful, untouched by time. I was sitting on the couch, listening to my little sister, Emma, talk about how excited she was for Christmas morning. As I looked around the room, everything felt too right. It was the kind of moment you wish would never end. But then it happened. I was on Christmas and I heard a noise, a soft scratching sound coming from somewhere in the house. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the creaks and groans of an old structure on a cold night. But then it came again, louder this time, a rhythmic scratching, almost as if something or someone was trying to claw its way in. My parents were in the kitchen, preparing the final touches for dinner, and Emma was too caught up in her excitement to notice. I tried to brush it off, assuming it was the wind or an animal outside, but something about it felt wrong. It was too deliberate, too focused. I stood up and walked to the window, peering outside. The yard was empty, blanketed in snow, no footprints or movement in sight. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. After all, it was Christmas Eve, the most magical time of the year, or so I thought. The scratching continued. It was coming from the attic. I froze. I had never heard anything from the attic before. The door was always locked, and we rarely used that part of the house. But tonight it was different. Tonight, something was awake in the attic. I stood at the base of the stairs, staring up into the darkness of the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the sound grow louder, closer, almost as if whatever was up there knew I was there. I had to check. I had to know what was happening. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly ascended the stairs. The old wooden steps creaked under my weight, each one amplifying the silence of the house. As I reached the top, the scratching stopped. I was in complete darkness, save for the beam of light from my flashlight. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me, and for a moment I debated turning back. But I couldn't. Something inside me told me I had to find out what was in the attic. I approached the door, which was ajar just enough for me to slip through. I pushed it open and was met with a thick layer of dust and the musty scent of old furniture. The beam of my flashlight revealed old trunks, abandoned boxes, and forgotten items covered in sheets. But something was off. There, in the corner of the attic, I saw a shadow. A dark figure crouched near the far wall, its form hidden by the clutter. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure shifted, slowly rising to its feet. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, two piercing points of light that stared directly at me. The figure was unnaturally tall, its limbs twisted and elongated in ways that no human being could be. Its face was obscured, but the hollow black eyes were enough to make my blood run cold. My body went numb with fear, and for a moment I couldn't move. Then it spoke, its voice like the sound of nails scraping against a chalkboard. "Leave this house." I didn't need to be told twice. My legs finally moved, and I bolted down the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. I ran into the living room, gasping for breath. But when I turned to look behind me, the shadow was gone. My parents came rushing into the room, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed with terror. They looked at me with concern, but I couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I stayed in the living room, too afraid to sleep, my eyes constantly scanning the dark corners of the house. I kept hearing things, whispers, faint movements, like something was walking just out of sight. But when I checked, everything was still. The next morning, when I woke up, it was as if nothing had happened. The house was peaceful again, the only sign of the nightmare being the lingering sense of dread that clung to the walls. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was all just a bad dream, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I was on Christmas, and I would never forget the eyes that stared at me from the shadows. Something was still in the house, something ancient, something hungry, and it was waiting. Years have passed since that night, but I've never returned to that house. The memories still haunt me, especially during Christmas. I don't know what that thing was or why it chose to make itself known to me that night. But I know one thing for sure: not every Christmas is filled with joy. Some are filled with things best left in the dark. Nestled deep in the Rocky Mountains, Evergreen Lodge was a picturesque retreat during the holidays. Every December, it became a winter wonderland. Strings of golden lights adorned the lodge, casting a warm glow over the snow-draped grounds. Guests came for its famed Christmas Eve feast, sledding trails, and the majestic 15-foot Christmas tree decorated with antique ornaments. But behind its charming exterior lay a chilling secret, a tale of tragedy and restless spirits that many dismissed as a ghost story. In December 1953, a blizzard trapped a group of guests at the lodge for nearly a week. Supplies ran low, tempers flared, and then silence. When rescuers arrived days later, they found the lodge completely abandoned. Plates of food sat untouched on the dining tables, suitcases remained unpacked, and fires still smoldered in the hearths. The guests had vanished without a trace. The only clue was a single, blood-stained ornament hanging on the grand Christmas tree. Over the years, rumors spread of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena at Evergreen Lodge, but these tales did little to deter eager vacationers. This Christmas, Sarah Whitman and her family booked a holiday getaway at the lodge. For Sarah, it seemed like the perfect escape from the chaos of city life, a chance to spend quality time with her husband Mark and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. From the moment they arrived, Lily was enchanted by the towering Christmas tree in the lobby, its twinkling lights and vintage ornaments mesmerizing her. The first night, Sarah woke to the faint sound of singing. It was a child's voice, distant yet melodic, carrying a haunting tune she couldn't place. She assumed it was another family staying at the lodge and drifted back to sleep. But the next morning, Lily made an unsettling claim. "I made a new friend," she said cheerfully. "His name is Peter. He lives here." Sarah smiled, thinking it was Lily's imagination, but Lily's descriptions felt oddly specific. "He wears funny clothes like in your old pictures, Mommy. He told me the Christmas tree is magic." That evening, the lodge held its annual tree lighting ceremony. As the guests gathered, the staff counted down to the big moment. But just as the lights were supposed to turn on, the power cut out. Gasps echoed in the darkness, and Sarah felt an icy chill creep down her spine. She heard Lily whisper, "Peter's here," just as the lights flickered back on. When Sarah looked at the tree, she noticed a new ornament hanging from its branches, a cracked glass angel she hadn't seen before. Mark brushed off her concerns, blaming old wiring and overactive imaginations, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few days, the lodge became increasingly unsettling. Doors creaked open on their own, faint laughter echoed through the halls at night, and Sarah found wet footprints near their room, though no snow had been tracked inside. Lily continued to talk about Peter, saying he wanted her to see the special place under the tree. On Christmas Eve, the tension reached its peak. As the guests gathered for dinner, Lily suddenly disappeared. Panic set in as Sarah and Mark searched the lodge, calling her name. Then Sarah heard it, the same eerie singing that had woken her days earlier. She followed the sound to the lobby, where she found Lily standing by the Christmas tree, her small hand reaching toward the branches. "Lily," Sarah screamed, rushing toward her daughter. But as she approached, she froze. Surrounding the tree was a circle of ghostly children, their pale faces illuminated by the twinkling lights. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their eyes hollow and lifeless. At the center of the group was a boy with dark hair and a solemn expression. "Peter," Lily whispered, her voice filled with awe. Peter turned to Sarah, his gaze piercing. "You can stay with us," he said softly. His voice was calm but carried an undeniable weight, as if it were both a request and a command. Sarah's scream shattered the stillness. She grabbed Lily and pulled her away from the tree. The children faded into the shadows, and the room went silent. The family packed their belongings and left the lodge that very night. Mark tried to rationalize the events, blaming stress and holiday excitement, but Sarah knew what she had seen. Days later, unable to let it go, Sarah delved into the lodge's history. She discovered that Peter had been a guest in 1953. He and several other children had died during the infamous blizzard, their bodies found frozen near the tree after allegedly being lured outside by someone or something promising gifts. Though the Whitmans never returned to Evergreen Lodge, the memory of that Christmas haunted Sarah for years. Every Christmas Eve, as the clock struck midnight, She swore she could still hear faint laughter and the haunting melody of that ghostly carol, echoing as a chilling reminder of the spirits that lingered beneath the twinkling lights of the Evergreen Lodge. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years, Laura felt a sense of dread instead of the usual excitement. She sat by the window of her small, quiet house, looking out at the falling snow. The lights on her tree flickered in the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the room. Laura had always loved Christmas, the warmth, the family, the festive cheer. But this year, something felt wrong. Her family was miles away, and she had decided to spend the holiday alone, hoping to find some peace after a rough year. But peace had evaded her. Strange things had started happening the night she put up the tree. At first, it was small things, objects that weren't where she left them, whispers in the middle of the night, and the feeling of being watched. But as Christmas approached, the occurrences grew more sinister. The footsteps in the attic, the cold drafts, and the dark shapes that seemed to flicker just out of the corner of her eye. Every night, the noises grew louder, until Laura couldn't sleep at all. That night, she received a gift. There was a knock on her door, a simple package left on her doorstep. No note, no return address, just a plain brown box with a ribbon tied around it. She stared at it for a long moment before bringing it inside, her heart racing. It was a beautiful, antique-looking box, the kind you would find in a dusty old shop. It had a strange, unsettling aura about it, but she couldn't resist. She untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was a small, delicate porcelain doll. Its eyes were wide, almost too wide, and its face was frozen in a permanent, eerie smile. Laura's skin prickled. She knew immediately that something wasn't right. She had never seen this doll before, and yet there was something unnervingly familiar about it. A memory stirred, one she couldn't quite place. She set the doll on the mantel and went to bed, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But the night was far from over. At midnight, she woke with a start. The room was colder than it had ever been, and the air felt heavy, suffocating. She looked around, her breath catching in her throat. The doll was no longer on the mantel. It was sitting on the edge of her bed, its glassy eyes staring at her. A chill ran down her spine. She had clearly left it on the mantel, but somehow it had moved on its own. The whispers returned, louder now, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. Laura tried to call out, but her voice was caught in her throat. She was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to scream. Suddenly, the door to her bedroom creaked open, and in the doorway stood a figure. It was her grandmother, who had passed away years ago, but there was something terribly wrong. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her mouth stretched into a twisted grin. Her body was stiff and unnatural, like a marionette on broken strings. "Grandma?" Laura whispered, her voice shaking. But the figure did not respond. It simply stood there, watching her with cold, dead eyes. And then it stepped forward. Laura tried to move, to scream, but the figure reached out, its cold, bony hand touching her arm. A shock of ice spread through her body, and she felt her chest tighten as if the life was being sucked out of her. The figure leaned in close, its breath cold on her face. "You shouldn't have opened the gift," it whispered, its voice a guttural rasp. The doll was meant for someone else, someone who died long ago. The room spun around her, and the whispers grew louder, filling her ears. The doll had been cursed, a gift meant to bring death to those who dared to take it. Laura's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. The gift wasn't a gift at all. It was a trap, and she had fallen into it. As the figure moved closer, the shadows in the room deepened. The air grew thick, suffocating, and the whispers became deafening. Laura's vision blurred, and just as she thought she would lose herself to the dark, everything went silent. The next morning, the snow had stopped falling, and the sun was shining brightly through the window. Laura woke up in her bed, her body stiff and cold. She glanced around, confused. The room was exactly as it had been the night before, except for one thing. The doll was gone. Laura stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She looked around the room, but the doll was nowhere to be found. Her heart raced as she realized the truth. Whatever had happened the night before, it hadn't been a nightmare. It was real, and the doll, the cursed doll, was still out there. She knew one thing for sure: it would come for her again, and next time it would be much worse.